Welcome to the first on-location episode of Billy and Ann's Fun with OELs. We had several fan emails asking us to do an on-location episode. So for those of you that wrote in, today's the day. Our first episode reviewed the history of occupational exposure limits, or OELs. Today's episode will discuss the unknown health effects and risk associated with vaping. In episode 1, Ann and I discussed the unforeseen hazard of diacetyl, the popcorn butter flavoring. This product was deemed safe as a food additive by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. While safe for ingestion, it turns out to cause severe lung disease when inhaled. On today's episode, we're shooting on location at your local neighborhood vape shop. And we talked about hazards associated with diacetyl. Vape liquids have numerous chemicals with unknown health hazards, including diacetyl. So today we're going to answer the question, to vape or not to vape. In this episode, we've also got a special treat, a guest speaker, Dr. Sherry Marcham, CIH, CSP, CHMM, FAIHA, from the AIHA's Indoor Air Quality and Risk Assessment Committee. Dr. Marcham is the 2018 Henry J. Smith Award winner selected by AIHA for her evidence-based contributions to the profession. Welcome, Dr. Marcham.
So this is a schematic of the basic design for an electronic cigarette. However, there's a number of different configurations, but in general, there's a mouthpiece, there's a cartridge that holds the liquid, which is called the e-juice, and the e-juice contains the nicotine, the carrier, and flavorings. There's a heating element or an atomizer to heat the juice to make the vapor, and there's always a battery to charge so that it works off the battery. Some devices have a light on the end to kind of make it look like the glow of a cigarette, but not all of them do. As a matter of fact, there is a number of different kinds of devices on the market. The first generation electronic cigarettes looked like a cigarette. That's why they would have the little light on the end to simulate the glow of a regular cigarette. But then the next generation, the second generation, had a tank, so the tank can hold a larger reservoir of the fluid, and it's rechargeable. The first generation were disposable, whereas the second generation are rechargeable, and you can change the liquid that's in there. The third generation are what generally called mods. The user can adjust the voltage and the wattage and can have a bigger reservoir, can add devices to it. The mods are the ones that are used for cloud chasing, and cloud chasing is where the user tries to generate the largest cloud possible. There's also e-pipes and e-cigars, but the newest item on the market you'll see over to the right between the first and second generation. These are the brand name is Juul, and so a lot of the younger generation are calling these juuling, calling the process juuling rather than vaping. They look just like a thumb drive, and so they're very discreet. Students can carry them in their backpack at school. They can throw them in their pocket. You can throw them in your pocket on an airplane. You can go back to the lavatory and juul in the lavatory. So this device is the newest one on the market and is the most popular now with students because it is so small. Regardless of the configuration, the primary components of any electronic cigarette are propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin. It can be 100% propylene glycol or 100% vegetable glycerin, but usually it's a mixture of about 70% propylene glycol, 30% vegetable glycerin. That's the carrier. That's the item in the juice that makes the vape. 99% of electronic cigarettes on the market now contain nicotine. So you can get nicotine-free juices, but the FDA actually studied and tested many of these e-juices and found that even though they say they don't contain nicotine, they actually do contain nicotine. And then the flavoring choices are just beyond what you can believe. There's over 7,700 flavorings that were known to be on the market a few years ago, and surely there's been more added since then. Start with the propylene glycol vegetable glycerin mixture. So this is the same mixture that's used in theatrical fog. And the problem is that we do know that workers exposed to theatrical fog have had health effects from being exposed to this sort of vape cloud. The problem also is that when you heat it up, the coil that heats it up to make the vape, pyrolysis happens. And when you're heating the glycerin component, formaldehyde, acrolein, and acetaldehyde are created and therefore inhaled and also exhaled as a part of the vaping. So let's talk about those components. Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen. It's what they embalm bodies with, so it's pretty nasty. The higher the voltage, the higher the concentration of formaldehyde. And so the mods where users try to make the biggest cloud possible, those create the most amount of formaldehyde. The second component is acrolein. Now, acrolein is an irritant. It is thought to contribute to cardiovascular disease in cigarette smokers, and so since it's also present in vaping, it could also contribute to cardiovascular disease. The next is acetaldehyde. It's also a known human carcinogen. And then, of course, nicotine is present. And as was said earlier, it's addictive, it's teratogenic. And here's the big thing with the younger users is that nicotine can harm adolescent brain development. And again, some e-cigs labeled as nicotine-free really aren't, and so the user may think they're not getting any nicotine, but they are. So this is a slide from the CDC, and the CDC is, of course, concerned about e-cigarette users because 7 out of 10 middle and high school students have used a tobacco-flavored product, and most of those are the e-cigs. And so that's 2 to 3 million middle to high school students that have now taken up vaping. And so the process of vaping for them is not to quit smoking, but it probably has hooked them on nicotine, and they'll be vaping or smoking for life until they kick the nicotine habit. The next thing I want to talk about is flavoring. As I stated, there's probably over 8,000 now different flavors, and we're talking about Tutti Frutti, bubblegum, chocolate, cinnamon, all of the flavors, and you can mix and match whatever flavoring. The problem is that these flavorings very well may be considered generally recognized as safe or GRAS. That's an FDA notation for something that's edible. So we know, for example, butter flavoring, which is diacetyl, as a food additive. We can eat it on flavored popcorn, butter flavored popcorn all day long. The workers exposed to aerosolized diacetyl have experienced significant health concerns. The health effect is called bronchiolitis obliterans, and it's a debilitating lung disease. We've also learned that some replacement chemicals for diacetyl are just as harmful, and there are several studies that show that diacetyl and the replacement chemicals are found in up to 73% of the flavorings that are available on the market. Even though it may or may not be on the label, it's present in the liquid. So here's the problem with the flavors. Again, there's more than 7,700 known flavors. That, I think, statistic comes from like 2014, and so now with 2018, I'm sure there's more on the market. Many have been found to contain diacetyl and a lot of other known health hazards. We just don't know what the health effects of the aerosolized vapor exposure on these flavorings is, but if it's anything like diacetyl, you can eat it, but you can't breathe in the vapor without having health effects. And the other thing is we just don't know what happens when it's heated. These flavorings could break down into other hazardous materials that are both breathed in and then breathed back out for the secondary exposure. So what we do know about secondhand exposure is that all of these components have been found in the secondhand vaping. It's not just harmless water vapor. That's the poster that's being placed out in California to let folks know that the secondhand exposure can contain nicotine, formaldehyde, which is a carcinogen, acetaldehyde, which is also a carcinogen. You've got the fine particles. There's also metal exposures from the coils that are used in the electronic cigarettes, and those are also found in the secondhand exposure. Another thing to think about is that there are a lot of flavorings that might have an allergic reaction to someone adjacent to you. For example, nut flavorings. There's a large population that has a peanut allergy, and so if someone's vaping next to you and you have a peanut allergy and they're using a nut flavoring, you may be exposed. These are the diacetyl 2,3-pentadione and 2,3-hexane-dione. Those are the butter flavoring substitutes, and they have been found in secondhand exposures. So the bottom line is it's not just harmless water vapor. The vaping products contains very harmful components beyond just nicotine. They can contain formaldehyde, hazardous materials that the user is exposed to and that the bystander may be exposed to. And in fact, there's research going on that there may be third-hand exposure concerns because as these vape clouds settle onto surfaces, nicotine has been found on the surfaces, which if you're in an environment where there's children, they can do a lot of hand-to-mouth exposures. And so now we're even worried about third-hand exposures. So it's not just harmless water vapor.
Thank you, Dr. Marcham, for a very enlightening talk. I think that we've answered the burning question, no pun intended, to vape or not to vape. Thank you, and see you on episode 4.
You can vape if you want to, you can even smoke. But if you vape or if you smoke, then you're no friend to health. I say you can vape if you want to, and you can even smoke. But if you vape or if you smoke, then you're no friend to health. It's a suicide, it's suicide, it's a slow suicide. It's a suicide, it's a suicide, it's a slow suicide.